right, so Jordan, jumping off our last topic, we discussed what was the reception of the Jews typically like to this person, Jesus of Nazareth, right? And I don't know about you, but I felt like when we approached the second question, which is, how then did the Gentiles or the non-Jewish people relate to Jesus Christ? That was kind of a harder question for me to answer. What do you think?
Yeah, it's definitely something that it's got a different dynamic to it, a different taste to it. If we just go back to even the Jewish expectations, they all saw this idea the Messiah was for the Jews. It's all about what's going to happen to the Jews. But we know in the history of everything that it's not just the Jews, it's for the Gentiles. And so when we get to that expectation being shattered, how do we view that? So I think there's two main ideas about the Jewish and Gentile receptions. We talked about the polarization with the Jews. I think that timing is more important with the Gentiles. Before the cross, before Jesus died on the cross, who was Jesus to the Gentiles? He was just some guy who was doing miracles. They recognized he was powerful. They recognized he had some influence. But he wasn't really somebody who stood out to them. And then we get to after the cross, where people start believing in Jesus, coming to the church, being saved. And that started out with just the Jews, but we see as more and more time goes on, as the initial Jewish converts spread, that the Gentiles start coming in too. And one of the amazing things I noticed when you look at the history of that is that the Gentiles always had this expectation that they needed something. There's that inner need in the person that we need God. And they did this through magic and idols and everything. But you see, whenever Jesus came on the picture, they threw all that away. And it's just amazing how much of their life they invested into it for them to just sacrifice it right away for this Jew who just showed up a few years ago.
Yeah, amen. I think that's a great way of viewing it, actually, because even though I agree with you, even though like some of the examples are few and far between, at least in the Gospels, there is a sense, and especially because they were lacking all that Jewish heritage which told of this Messiah, there's a sense in which Jesus had always had his eye on the horizon of reaching all peoples. I think about that famous story in Matthew in the beginning, that he would be a light to the nations, right? One story I have to share, though, that always compels me, and it's perfect because it's in line with our series through the Gospel of Mark, is the very culmination of Mark, right at the tail end of his gospel, is that as Jesus is being crucified and as he breathes his last, it's not a Jew, but it's a Gentile. It's a centurion standing next to him who was taught to worship Caesar as God, who looks at Jesus and says, truly, this was the Son of God.